All right, let's continue talking about the policies during the Meiji Restoration. Okay, and through these policies, we would have a good understanding of the role the Japanese government played during this, revolutionary period. Okay, and so in the previous video, we discussed the compulsory education policy, which helped Japan, get its labor force prepared, okay, for the Industrial Revolution, okay, in Japan, I mean. And here, let's check out the second policy during the Meiji Restoration. So they simply removed all the the traveling restrictions for their labor. Okay, so here include the general public and even for the samurais. Okay, so during the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, people were not free to move. Okay, so they were similar to the slaves, working for the local warlord daimyo. Okay, and if they want to travel, from one daimyo's territory to another, they have to, report and get the permission from them. Okay, and then during the Meiji Restoration, they removed all of this. Okay, and they also passed the law allowing people applying for jobs. Okay, so you can work for different jobs. You can again go anywhere you want. Okay. So that significantly improved the mobility of labor, okay? And then it can help them better allocate their labor resources, okay? And they also did another very important reform. It's a fiscal reform. So in the ancient Japan, the government revenue comes from the crop tax. The crop tax means, as a farmer, how much tax you're supposed to pay to the government depends upon your crop output. Okay, so for example, if you are growing rice or wheat, and the tax rate is 20%, let's say, then the tax base is your crop. So if your output is, let's say, 100 pounds this year, then you pay 20 pounds of rice to the government as taxes. Okay. In the agricultural society, that's pretty common. Okay. However, there's a pretty obvious drawback from the government perspective. First, the tax revenue heavily depends upon the output. Okay, and we know that in the old days, without the machinery, equipment, and technologies, the output was heavily affected by the weather, okay, climate, or some kind of unexpected factors. Okay. So again, from the budgetary perspective of the government, it's hard to predict how much revenue is going to come in, and so it will be hard for them to figure out how much they could spend. Okay, so during the Restoration, the government sent its officials to every corner of the country and do the land measurement. So they collect a lot of data about who owns how much land, okay? And eventually they switch their tax base from the crop output to the land, okay? So how much you should pay to the government as a tax depends upon not your output, but your land, okay? And we know, the land area is not going to change, right? It could be, bought and sold or rented, but again, from the government perspective, nationwide, the land area is not going to change. So this fiscal reform makes the Japanese government have a very reliable and constant source of revenue. Okay, and also the land tax is paid in currency, not rice, wheat, or any agricultural products. Okay, um, they perform the currency payment because if government continue to take the crops as the payment of the tax, then later when government want to use the for example the rice they collected to exchange something else, then the price of the rice would be a big issue here because the government was the largest center on the market, right? So, for example, the government needs, let's say, some coal, okay, to like the fuel, okay, and they would like to, use the rice to exchange coal on the market. Then, when they put this transaction out there, telling the market that they need more coals and they are going to use the rice to pay that, then on the rice market, the price will drop immediately because they know the government is going to release more rice on the market to, you know, to fund their purchase of the coal. Okay, so it creates a lot of uncertainties on the market. Okay, the market for other goods and services. So that's why they do not really like the old way, using the crops to pay the taxes, and they switch to the currency payment. Okay, as we said, this is very important. If you recall, the ultimate goal of Meiji restoration is to build a modern nation state and a strong army, right? For both purposes, again, the constant revenue for the government is the key, okay? Because with that, the government can do a lot more, which they couldn't do before. They also established a central bank in 1882. Okay, this is way ahead of many other developing economies, okay, in Asia and beyond. And they also build a large amount of infrastructures. Again, here with the fiscal resources, okay, they got from the land tax. These infrastructures, including the telegraph service between Tokyo and Yokohama in 1870. Okay, so that made the information to be transmitted in a much faster way. Okay? And they also started providing the postal service in 1871. Okay? And the first railroad was built in 1872 and had 6,200 kilometers of railroad by the beginning of 20th century. Okay? Again, as you can see, within the period of 3 decades, Japan moved very quickly to be at least a halfway industrialized economy, right? And they also made a lot of efforts to facilitate the technological transfer, okay? Because again, when they opened the door to the Western merchants, okay, they also learned a lot from them about the foreign technologies. Okay, and here we can just use the textile industry as an example, okay, because at the beginning of their trading with the Westerners, they find that textile is where their comparative advantage is. Okay, and so they made a lot of clothing or the textile related products. Okay, But what's interesting is at the beginning, when they start using or purchasing a lot of like the machinery or even assembly lines, okay, these giant textile making machines, and use them in the factories, they actually found a rumor quickly spreading out, among the general public. The rumor said that if you worked in front of these machines, they're gonna take your soul away. Okay, so you are simply being killed by doing that. Again, it, it it sounds pretty ironic today, right? But back then, in the agricultural society, people believed that. Okay, so what Japanese government did, very interestingly, uh, because back then in these textile factories, most of the workers are females. Okay, the males are in the coal mining industries, other construction, railroad construction industries. So in the textile uh, factories, we see most of these workers are females. Now, because people refuse to work in front of these assembly line or textile making machines, so the government officials actually sent their daughters to these factories and work in front of these machines. In other words, they act like the role model, okay? Or, they are demonstrating to the rest of the society that this is fine. These machines will not take your souls away, okay? So again, you may feel like during the whole Meiji restoration, um, it's actually, the government led the industrialization of Japanese economy. All right. And we have more examples. Uh, let's see, at the beginning of their industrialization, they purchased a lot of machines, equipments from um, the Western economies. Okay, but they did not have the technicians, mechanics to operate them. Okay? So they don't even know how to run these machines. So they hired a large amount of the foreign technical advisors. Okay, they paid them an extremely high salary and get them to Japan and teach them how to operate these machinery equipments. Okay? Now, the government also conducted a series of industrial policies. Okay? For example, they directly subsidized the modern factories because, once again, at the beginning stage of their trading with the Western societies, they find that their modern factories, by that we mean automaking or even the textile industries, um, some of these, advanced high level or high skilled industries, of course, back then, not today, okay, they found that they did not have any comparative advantage. In other words, putting the quality aside, okay, the machinery equipment, cars, these Japanese firms made could not even come close to that made by Western firms, okay, like in Germany, in UK, in United States. Okay, so there's no way they could compete with them on the market. Now, what Japanese government did is to heavily subsidize these firms so that they can lower their price of the final products and compete with the Western firms on the market. Okay. Now, if you remember, I told you guys before that we spend a lot of time talking about Japan because it's a rule model, right? So in terms of the subsidization, later when we talk about China and India, we will see, their governments did exactly the same thing. Okay. And they also protected the certain industries from the foreign competitions, like a Mitsubishi. Okay, today we know it's a very famous conglomerate, making cars, elevators, electronics. but back then it was a startup. It needs the government protection. Okay?